Hello, students of Masters in English. You are doing a course MEG 7. More specifically, it is Indian writing, non-fiction prose, and even more specifically, it is a course on travel writing. Let me introduce myself. I am Nivedita Sen. I teach English in Hansraj College, Delhi University. I'm interested in a lot of popular forms of writing, children's literature, detective fiction, and among them, travel writing. As you know, you have two travel writing pieces in your course. One is Kinghai Lake by Vikram Seth, and the other is Amitav Ghosh's Stories in Stones. One is taken from In Heaven Lake, and the other is taken from Dancing in Cambodia. And I hope you're familiar with the texts, and I hope you've read the text before coming here. To talk about travel, the human imagination has always been fascinated by the exotic and the inaccessible. Is it not exciting to read about faraway places where the geographical terrain, the ethno-cultural communities that inhabit that terrain, and their way of life is totally different from what we see all around us? The basic urge to travel is attributed to various motives: human curiosity, adventure, political and personal errands, missions of diplomacy and cultural ambassadorship, pilgrimages, trade, business, even crossing of frontiers for food and jobs. But why do you think common people sometimes make special effort to go for a holiday or undertake a trip to a far-flung or even a nearby place? It is usually to escape the monotony and the regimen of home and work and to relax in a congenial ambience. Some extras that could be thrown in are nature, then adventure, art and architecture, things like that. More generally, going on a holiday is to partake of a rhythm of life that is different from the tedious routine of the place one lives in, with its stressful demands on one's body and mind. Going on a vacation, don't you think, should not be the prerogative of people with high-profile jobs living in the metropolises, but don't you think it is equally necessary for people who are enervated by the drudgery of home and work and can barely make their ends meet? In India, and generally in a third world context, unfortunately, however, their finances do not permit them to take a break, which is a luxury that only the affluent can afford. Getting to travel writing awakens the curiosity of the common reader who has neither the wherewithal nor the motivation to visit exotic places, but is enabled enough to have access to the realm of books and magazines. But does reading about travel only demonstrate a thirst for information that one could just as well get from travel brochures, magazines, guidebooks, etc.? Or is it the hope of being able to participate in the vicarious experiences of lands and peoples one has never visited? For the armchair traveler, both these can be done within the safety of home. A travel narrative is not a catalogue of objective facts. No two travel writers have the same homogenized account to narrate about their place of visit. Each travel writer has her or his unique experiences and a special manner of recounting a journey or a stay in a place that is not one's home, adding to the description a distinctive color and flavor. The travel writer who does not write professionally for travel guides need not be over-concerned about accurate facts, but could indulge in rambling descriptions that can be relished in a very, very leisurely kind of fashion. Creative travel writing is also often about places that one does not usually visit. The writer also need not keep the requirements of a business traveler in mind. The creative travel writer does not try to sell a tourist locale and therefore need not cater to a market of readers who might be inspired to visit the site after reading about it. Features in Sunday magazines, travel features may be aimed at potential travelers, but they too do not involve any hardcore selling. Some kind of travel writing, even within narratives and in other genres, has existed from classical times. In our own epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, the self-imposed exile or banishment of the protagonists from their legitimate kingdoms initiates their wanderings and explorations over different kinds of terrain, as well as facilitates opportunities for encounters with strange creatures very unlike themselves. In classical Greece, Homer's Odyssey describes the amazing adventures of the epic hero Odysseus on his voyage home from the Trojan Wars. Warrior heroes have always been known to move from place to place in quest of extending their kingdoms or in a wish for self-fulfillment. In India, the travel accounts of Chinese pilgrims Fa Hien and Huensang, as well as those of medieval French writers like Tavernier and Bernier, are well-known religious, political, social and cultural documents. During the Renaissance, going back to Europe, when voyages of discovery proliferated all over Europe, stretching to all parts of the world, travel once again percolated into the literature of the time. Often, tales about traveling would be fictitious and fantastic, like in the English classics Robinson Crusoe and Gulliver's Travels. These have, however, been followed by very true-to-life children's stories about extraordinary journeys and trips, like Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island or Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days, which you might have read as children. Travel, therefore, has inexhaustible variety and is a genre with multifarious possibilities. However, travel writing has gained respectability on its own merit only over the last few decades. Though it was always part of popular literature, it was hitherto hardly ever taken seriously by scholars. It has now come to be recognized not just as recreational reading for lay readers, but as an important part of mainstream literature. Travel is now a literary field that has stimulated the interest of the scholar and the critic. And there is a substantial corpus of academic dissertations on the subject. With the growth of new historicist criticism over the last 2 decades, there has been a far-reaching widening of the literary domain. And texts that were once considered non-literary have now come to be accepted as part of the canon. Receiving more and more critical attention, it is a resource that contributes to interdisciplinary studies combining history, literature, anthropology and culture studies. There are also prestigious journals like Studies in Travel Writing, and courses on travel writing are now available in British and American universities. In India, travel writing as a discrete genre actually started in the 19th century, and it shows a sporadic trajectory despite an abundant output in the 20th century. The first Indian travel writings can be classified under two categories. The former dealt with visits abroad, mainly England, but also other European countries, and also China, Russia and Japan. The latter was about journeys to Indian cities and villages, pilgrim centers, places of historical interest and natural habitats. Some questions you need to keep in mind while reading the two travel pieces in your course are: what are Seth and Ghosh's motives behind the travel? Seth specifies that it is neither religious pilgrimage, study, trade, diplomacy, flight, migration, nor empire building and consolidation. What, as a very ordinary but itinerant spirit, entices him to undertake the hazardous journey? Seth's journey outlines a route from China to India via Tibet. While reading Ghosh's narrative, keep your eyes open to whether he is interested in the history, the topography, the myths and legends, and the politics of the place, or in more everyday observations like their food, dress, religion, local beliefs, and ethno-cultural traits. What are the very small details that make the two narratives interesting? Do the narratives have autobiographical voices that are clearly audible? Is there anything else about the personal selves of the writers that we learn from the excerpts? From the short-term travel, are the authors able to arrive at any in-depth understanding of the lands and the people, both in their present cultural milieu and from whatever they can recuperate about their past? Are they appreciative or critical of the people that they meet? Is there any irony in the way they talk about them, their history, their religion, their superstitions, and their beliefs? Or is all the irony directed towards India, Indians, and the authors themselves? You must already have found out the exact geographical location of the places described in the travelogue. Situating Tibet and Cambodia cartographically will hone your interest in the place. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat, near the city of Siem Reap, is the inspiration behind the travel piece. Southern Qinghai is the title of Seth's excerpt. Qinghai is a province of the People's Republic of China named after Qinghai Lake. Qinghai is located on the northeastern part of the Tibetan plateau. Seth, travelling back from China via Tibet, is in a more amorphous and less well-defined terrain than Ghosh. Still, the names of the little towns Anduo, Shigarse, Naku, the capital Lhasa, and the mountain range Tangula can be read in a map. The adventure traveller is often face to face with the bountiful as well as the ominous aspects of nature, and records accounts of trekking, mountaineering, deep-sea diving, river rafting, wildlife, etc. Seth's account is full of a sense of adventure. His own propensity as a traveller is to savour the scenery and the natural landscape. The yak is a presence throughout the extract, both as an animal and in everyday consumer products like yak butter tea. The black, thick-haired yaks are not yet acclimatized to the machines, declaring the progress of civilization. They are still shocked by trucks, cars, etc., and flee hastily from the scene as these vehicles roar past. Apart from yaks, horses, sheep, ravens, a whole range of flowers, from buttercups, cornflowers to dandelions, daisies, and a silky deep blue flower that is not named, make up the flora and fauna of the territory. Another scenic description near Naku includes grassy patches, rain and hailstorms, and also snow-capped peaks. A swift snow-fed stream completes the picture of lush fertility. At sunset, the brilliant colors get muted into a photographic black and white panorama. That nature is not always benign is evident in the nagging ailments that accompany Sui, Gyanseng and Seth on their journey. Travel writing gradually developed into something that bordered on fiction or was a part of fiction. There is a very discernible narrative interest in most travel writing. Amitav Ghosh's Stories in Stones has narratives within the main narrative, weaving many legends and stories together. He says that it is, I quote, a monument to the power of the story. It is also described as a dramatic work with its own setting and its cast of galactic dimensions, the gods, deities, sages, prophets, etc. When Kongsarit elucidates the myths of Angkor Wat, his cigarette seems to paint the air with its glowing tip, giving him the aura of an artist. The architectural marvel interweaves literary and artistic forms like the story, the memoir, allegory, drama, and painting. A very important dimension of a travel narrative is its representation of the writer's engagement with the self. It therefore needs to be classified not only as non-fictional prose but the broad category of autobiographical writing. Such is Vikram Seth's hitchhiking trip through Xinjiang and Tibet into Nepal. In Stories in Stones, the historical site tells its own autobiography or its allegory of its own authorship. Its protagonists are the kings who built it and tried to erect comparative edifices but failed, the stories that are inscribed in the sculpture and architecture of the temple from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana filter down to us in myriad kinds of ways. For the author, they are tales told by a grandmother or learnt under duress from tutors. But for Kongsarit, who is a conservation worker, they have the immediacy and palpability of neighbors' overheard quarrels. This storytelling aspect of travel writing gives us a vivid impression of the place through the eyes and personal perceptions of the writer. Travelogues often tell the writer's story in his or her own words and are predominantly subjective accounts. The writing usually reflects all the components that go into making the writer the individual that he or she is, the writer in all his totality. Yet the writer should not be so subjective that it becomes impossible for the reader to identify with the place and the experience. If the truth about a place is unpleasant, the writer must be honest about it. A travel writer must combine the skills of a researcher, reporter, journalist with that of a novelist endowed with visual imagination. He or she must have an open mind that is free of bias. Reading about a place prior to visiting it helps to learn facts and figures and negotiate subjective biases, but it can also condition the travel writer's mind with preconceived notions. Being prepared for the unpredictable helps, as do observation and sensitivity to the place and its people. Keeping the senses of hearing, taste and smell in addition to that of sight enhances the writing. Dialogues are also an important feature of the narrative interest of a travelogue. They are sometimes suited into the recounting of an anecdote, making the experience come alive. Any altercation arising out of conflicting opinions gives us a sense of the mounting tension as well as helps to build a story line. The discerning traveller listens to what people say with interest rather than makes them say what he wants to hear. He tries not to miss any local color or flavor in the speech patterns of the unfamiliar people. Comments on local dialects and language contribute to the feel of a place. In Seth's extract, Tibetan soldiers who have been sent to work on the Karakoram highway have learnt a smattering of Urdu words which, he says, I quote him, which they practiced on me. In Ghosh's extract, however, the dialogue between him and Luang Chun, the monk, although it shows a lot of promise, the author begins by saying it needs the mediation of an interpreter, but the reader is not really provided any insightful or facetious details of communication gaps between the two of them. So that bit of, that dialogue is really lost on the reader. Fictional or autobiographical writing usually also has out of the ordinary characters. One interesting character that we meet in the course of Seth's journey is the truck driver Sui, who causes the author and his friend Gyanseng a lot of exasperation because each of his halts, and you must have noticed this as you read, is a long-term interval during which he catches up on old friendships as well as rests between long spells of difficult and risky driving. For Sui, journeys constitute the A to Z of his life. So his halts are leisurely, chatty, and a welcome change to him after hours behind the wheel. In Ghosh's piece on Cambodia, Kong Sarit narrates his growing relationship with Angkor Wat, and he is the interesting character. Unlike Luang Chun, he had no hereditary link with the Angkor. While still a college student, he was evacuated from Phnom Penh. He was marched to a labor camp and interrogated about his background. In order to survive, he lied that he had been a waiter at a wayside restaurant, and although he almost got caught for the lie, they spared him his life and instead made him wash dishes at the communal kitchen at all kinds of unearthly hours. It was a very, very rigorous kind of regime that he had to go through. Shortly before the regime fell, he was forcibly married off to a woman from Phnom Penh and has 4 children from the marriage. When they were set free, a lot of them walked to Phnom Penh, eating the little ration of rice that they had been doled out, boiling it over empty tin cans on open fires. They survived a life of extreme hardship. Walking to Siem Reap, the first sight of the majestic temple Angkor Wat, amidst the overgrowths of wild vegetation, erased the hunger, the death, the famine of the last many years from their minds. Listening to the tales that were engraved in bas-relief, B-A-S-relief, in bas-relief on the temple, Kong decided he would spend the rest of his life in Angkor Wat. Since 1979, he has been inextricably involved with, I quote, that great grey mountain of stone that had absorbed him into its teeming worlds, unquote. Sarit's reflections about his own life of privation is a grim interlude. And, humor is a component that could enliven such an interlude. In Ghosh's narrative, there is not much of it. When Seth and his companions, on the other hand, his companion Gyanseng, are endlessly delayed by the driver's social calls at every village that he stops, which I've discussed just now. He says, I quote, "The atrocious glare of the sun merges with my atrocious headache to give this beautiful landscape the quality of a nightmare." The two atrocities combine to paradoxically convert a beautiful image into a nightmarish one. The poem he composes while regretting why he undertook such a difficult expedition is a blend of the evocatively poetic and the humorously prosaic. Beginning with lyrical descriptions of nature, the verses also highlight their travails, and at the end they also render the outlook less depressing. How? With an ironical comment about the three tired men who, dreaming each of home, sleep talk in different tongues. Travel writing observes the culture of a certain people and how different it is from the environment in which the writer has been nurtured. Notes on paintings, sculpture, architecture, handicrafts and music of a region are valuable inputs for recording the cultural heritage of the place and its people, of which there is a lot in Ghosh's extract, but Seth's piece does not discuss the art of the Tibetan people at all. The high culture of a place comes through its local music and craft, but the popular culture is embodied in its food habits and its sartorial traditions. Seth expresses a very healthy curiosity about the food and beverages of the Tibetans. Their emulation of Indian sweet milk tea is an inedible concoction, he seems to think. The standard Tibetan drink of yak butter tea, which he describes it as a greasy yellow concoction, neither sweet nor clear, resembling soup. Their indigenously brewed alcohol is chang or kinke wine. Tibetans have also learned to smoke bidis from Indian friends. Northern and southern Chinese cuisine are differentiated by noodles and rice, but Sui, who's a northerner, gains a lot of goodwill because he has brought along some noodles to share with his southern friends who originally belonged to the north. Seth also describes the traditional and modern dress of both men and women. Travelogues are often social commentaries on the place of visit. Gyanseng, Seth's companion in the truck, tells him about the easy sociability and bonhomie among Tibetans in picnics where they eat, tell stories and return home drunk, dancing in a procession. Gyanseng's bonding with Seth is reinforced even as he sings a drinking song. Later, Seth seriously reflects on the Chinese economy. He believes that they have a better system of social care and distribution, particularly for their old and young. He pauses to consider the reasons why India's population control schemes have collapsed. He critiques the Indian economy for its bureaucratic interference at every level, and then he pauses to say that except for the mineral resources of the Chinese, India has more favorable and temperate climate conditions, more arable land, and is therefore blessed by nature in a way that the Chinese are not. And yet, Seth feels, and it's probably true, that the average Chinese is better clothed, fed, and sheltered. From social commentary, cultural commentary, economics, on to politics. Travelogues often seem incomplete without musing on local politics. Ghosh, for instance, exposes the tyrannical Khmer Rouge regime comprising the radical Marxists who controlled Cambodia for 4 nightmarish years from 1975 to 1979. Please remember the dates carefully. They were notorious for their state-sponsored massacre of 1 to 2 million Cambodians. Ironically, in the 2 decades since the regime was toppled, not a single Khmer Rouge was tried in a court of law, and Pol Pot, who was known as the regime's brother number one, has often been equated with Hitler and Stalin. His death from natural causes in 1998 really deprived the world of a sense of justice and a befitting closure to the Khmer Rouge era. Kong Sarit narrates how he was compelled to work like a beast in a concentration camp of the Pol Pot regime. The inhumanity and the cruelty of the regime is underscored in an incident when those who cheered at the fall of the regime were put to death. In Heaven Lake, the area that is now Qinghai needs to be located within the political history of China. Prior to 1724, it was under Tibetan control, but in that year it was conquered by the armies of the Qing dynasty. In 1928, Qinghai became a province of the Republic of China. Lately, of course, you know, Tibet has been much in the news for demanding its autonomy from China, but of course this is not Seth's concern in a travel piece that he wrote in 1983, which is 25 years ago. So his observations on politics are on the larger political regime of the Chinese. To a much lesser extent than the Khmer Rouge, Seth notes that the Chinese government is not answerable to anyone and is oppressive. The Cultural Revolution that condemned and destroyed anything belonging to the glorious past of the Chinese, like the Khmer Rouge era in Cambodia, also speaks of a dictatorial regime along the lines of Hitler and Stalin. So you found a comparative point of reference between the two pieces, the Khmer Rouge regime and the Chinese regime after the Cultural Revolution. Seth's enthusiastic remarks about the Chinese economy has been tempered and qualified by comparison and contrast with India's administrative system. India's achievement at the political level has been that the country has remained united and never been fragmented in independent India. China, which is a culturally and linguistically cohesive country anyway, is not even remotely threatened by secession. India has also been able to preserve democracy and has ousted unpopular governments twice. A court with autonomous powers, a free press and free and fair elections are responsible for this. From economy and politics on to history and myth. The creative writer who just gives a factual account of the past of a historical site, accomplishes only an encyclopedic kind of writing, devoid of local and private nuances. Travel writing preserves a feel of the past while trying to understand it from within a modern frame of reference, in a way that the two are not mutually exclusive but blend into each other. Such an effort is exemplified in Ghosh's account of the Angkor Wat temple. The seemingly incongruous conflation of the two demonstrates how the past seamlessly coalesces with the present. The legacy of the place, incorporating the stories woven around it, makes for a vibrantly creative experience. The interpenetration of the modern and the ancient embodied by the Angkor Wat is really a much more complex kind of analysis than we would find in a literary work that just celebrates the glory of lost civilizations. On retrospect, Ghosh realizes that the image of Angkor Wat never figures in anything to do with religion or in anything traditional, but it is found stamped in the most unexpected of places: cans of beer, civil and military uniforms, flags, and also it serves as a logo for banks and corporations. Ghosh really disclaims that the temple was discovered by Henry Mouhot, the French explorer, in the 19th century, and he thinks that the medieval monument was already known and absorbed into contemporary history. Its restoration used the most scientific methods available, and gradually the temple became a symbol of the modernizing nation state and signifying a break with its past and also, ironically, affirming its location in the contemporary world. History, of course, is usually also linked with the religious evolution of a place. As Seth and Gyan Singh pass through Tibetan towns like Anduo and Naku, they observe, curiously enough, incense sticks burning inside the houses in front of the portraits of both the Dalai Lama as well as Chairman Mao. This syncretic religion includes the worship of a religious leader and the leader of a political party whose ideology is atheistic. In Ghosh's piece, Angkor Wat, built during the early years of the 12th century, honors the Hindu god Vishnu and is a symbolic representation of Hindu cosmology. The historical trajectory of the temple has an interface in which the interface between Buddhism and Hinduism is really blurred. While tourists head for the main temple, local people offer their prayers at the smaller Buddhist shrines. The writer watches an ongoing ritual of benediction. He learns from the venerable monk Luang Chun the story of how the shrine that was fully operational, had been moved to a prominent place by French archaeologists who were restoring the temple. Since a Buddhist monastery had existed within the Hindu temple premises for centuries, a delegation of monks had met the king to protest against being expelled from the complex altogether. They were then allowed to rebuild within the temple complex at some distance. In the process, Chun also tells of his own growth from a stone crusher to a monk. In April 1975, when the Khmer Rouge seized power, Chun was sent to a concentration camp where he worked in the rice fields. In January 1979, when the Khmer Rouge was ousted from power, he was back to work in the temple, cleaning and restoring it. Stories in Stones is a chronicle in which personal memoir interpenetrates religion, history, politics, and aesthetics. The author's language and style, the last point that I want to come to, like in any literary piece, are also worth mulling over. For instance, there are a few interesting and graphic figures of speech. In Ghosh's piece, Luang Chun, the elderly Buddhist monk at the pagoda, is a tall, aquiline man whose saffron robes hung upon his skeletal limbs like sheets on a wire fence, a man who is described as sheets on a wire fence. For Seth again, yaks with their drooping fleece look like Pekingese dogs or willow trees. You know, willow trees have leaves which hang down. Both are far-fetched but extremely incisive similes. The style of a travel piece merges factual and fictional writing, keeping in mind its readership. Both pieces, although they go down well as popular reading, also provide readers with some amount of exposure to a literary style. Now this was really the last point. We have covered several aspects of travel writing that have gone into the composition of these two prose pieces. I'm sure there are other points that you might be able to point out now that you are reasonably familiar with the situation of the text within the genre of travel writing. I think you should take a note of, or you should make a note of these points, and please feel free to enhance or question whatever I have discussed today. Thank you very much. Next time, maybe we can discuss Mani Mahesh, which is another travel text in your course.